Bueno, pues aquí estamos ya. Ahí está el Jun. Hay un montón de peña. Y cada vez va entrando más. Hemos entrado por aquí. Aquí está Mario.
¡Hey! ¿Qué pasa? Estamos aquí disfrutando de la previa.
La previa, exactamente.
¡Qué guay!
Y ahora pues a ver qué nos cuentan. Vale, seguiremos informando.
Pues aquí estamos, que vamos a ver la serie. Nos han dicho que nos han dado, por si la queremos ver en versión original o en inglés. No sabemos si vamos a ver capítulos nuevos, capítulos antiguos. Vamos a ver, sorpresa.
Ay, madre.
Sorpresa. Acaban de apagar las luces.
This team has given us 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, with another season on the way. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni.
Hola. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué tal? ¿Qué pasa? Chicos, chicas, ¿cómo estamos? ¡Qué fuerte!, ¿no? ¡Qué nervios! La libreta de Chewbacca aquí. ¿Qué fuerte? Estaba pensando, estoy nervioso porque está con nosotros el Executive Producer, el Head of Writers, el Showrunner, el inmenso Jon Favreau. Oye, muy bien, ¿eh? Muy bien. Hello, everybody.
Took his helmet off, revealed his face, and among his sect of the Mandalorians, that is a great sin. And in order to be reaccepted into his culture, he has to be redeemed. And the only way to do that is to go to the planet of Mandalore, which is now in ruins, and to go down to the mines, and go down to the living waters, and bathe in the living waters so that he can be forgiven.
The Star Wars universe now is living an amazing time, a unique time, in the history of the saga, no? So we have upcoming new series like Ahsoka, Skeleton Crew, The Acolyte. So can you explain a little bit how you manage to coordinate all these projects all together? How the different team works, coordinate themselves, because it has to be complex.
Yes, so there's a lot going on over there in Star Wars. Some of it takes place at the same time period as The Mandalorian. So the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and Skeleton Crew all happen between Return of the Jedi, Episode 6, and Force Awakens, Episode 7. So there's 30 years, and that's our stories take place there. There's other stories like Acolyte, which takes place before, Obi-Wan Kenobi before, Andor before. So that area is what Dave Filoni, my partner, you all know Dave? So in addition to running the show of Ahsoka and being my partner producing all of those projects, he's also involved with the other projects you mentioned, and of course Kathy Kennedy. So there's a lot going on in Star Wars, but I only have to worry about the ones that are connected to the Mandalorian. For me, that's the only ones I have to keep straight, all the facts.
For me, Mandalorian is the best news.
And even the extended universe. So those are most of our conversations. Beyond that, it's about having characters that are clear and strong, and storylines that can be complicated but simple enough that a young person could watch it as well. Because we never want to close the door on the new fans. And it's okay for people of all ages to enjoy Star Wars, but we always have to make room for young people, because this is what mythology is about. Mythology is about the generation that's coming of age, learning lessons from the stories that they watch. And that was very much what George Lucas, when I've talked to him, has impressed upon me, that there's a responsibility that he's always felt. And I think we all try to uphold that. Now, as far as the technology goes, we have the smartest people and at ILM, and we always are looking for new ways to innovate. And we never shy away from being cutting edge with the technology. But Star Wars is always a combination of the old and the new. And so in Star Wars, you can have a puppet like Grogu, that although he's high-tech and animatronic, he still looks like a puppet. I don't know that that character would exist in another type of movie. I don't think you could see that character in a Marvel movie. I don't think you could see that in another science fiction movie. But because Star Wars always had that relationship with masks and puppets, like Yoda, the original Yoda, that there's part of the aesthetic. And so it can be kind of playful and silly, but also it can be really scary and tough. And also you could have invisible visual effects that you think are real, side by side with somebody with a rubber mask.
Excellent.
He's chasing the Jawas in the Sandcrawler. That was only about a half page or an eighth of a page saying he chases the Sandcrawler, he climbs up. I mentioned a few things that happen, and then he gets zapped and he falls off. And then Rick Famuyiwa worked with Dave Lowery, our storyboard artist, the director and the storyboard artist, and the stunt team, and they built out this whole sequence that you saw. That was like a big train robbery sequence from an old Western. So that's where it becomes very collaborative, and that's why I love it, and that's why you're not seeing me going off and making movies, that I've stuck with The Mandalorian and with Star Wars for so long, because I've never had as fulfilling of a collaborative process in storytelling for the screen.
Amazing.
No matter when they grew up and what Star Wars is their favorite. Because, you know, when I was growing up, there was a snobbishness about Return of the Jedi compared to the first two. I was a little kid when the first one came out, and I was in high school and I was an usher in the movie theater when Return of the Jedi came out. So even then there was arguments about which is the real Star Wars. And then the prequels came out and all the older people said, well, our Star Wars is better. Well, now those people who grew up with the prequels, that's their Star Wars. And then you have to look at it with renewed curiosity, because you realize that George's vision tied all of it together. And by me talking to Dave Filoni, I've learned to really appreciate the prequels. And now you have sequels with a whole new generation that connect with those characters. And there are people who grew up with the Clone Wars, because there was a whole stretch of 10 years when that was what Star Wars was. And so our goal is to bring all Star Wars fans together. And no matter what you like, we want to let you know that we respect that part of the canon, that we want to have everybody be included in what we present. In the latest Avengers films. And what was interesting is that they could do chapters that were not in the specific storylines of the characters that would affect characters and for the Avengers. So like Captain Marvel being introduced, Black Panther. So I learned a lot by watching how sophisticated the audiences were. And people are very quick to fill each other in. So I felt that I had the liberty to not spend all the time with those two characters apart in The Mandalorian, and spend that time in the Book of Boba Fett as chapters that were, as though it were a novel where there were chapters that dealt with different characters. And everybody seems to follow it. And of course, thanks to Disney Plus, you can go back and watch certain episodes. And we're also going to have recaps that we put together for people who are maybe more casual viewers, who want to be brought up to speed after 2 years and reminded where the characters were. But Grogu has developed a lot, and now time has even passed since the Book of Boba Fett, and since he's trained with Luke, as you can see, his force powers have gotten greater. Okay, thank you. I met him, but I know him more closely through the people that have worked with him for a long time, like Kathy Kennedy and Dave Filoni. He is a interesting mentor. He deals with everybody slightly differently. And he's somebody who is available, but is not always around. So he's like a grandfather when he visits, you know, he comes, plays with the kids, but doesn't change any diapers, you know. And so, but he's also very smart, and all this came out of his imagination. And whenever he comes by the set, doesn't happen often, but when he does come through, you could feel the energy change, because, you know, as exciting as it is to work on Star Wars, when he's there, it really feels like you're connected to where it all came from. And I think that it's just important that you hear what he says and really think about what he means, because he, you know, will often talk about things that might not seem related to Star Wars when he's talking about it. He might talk about other myths, other films, but he cares very deeply about it, and I'm very lucky to have gotten to know him. But in all the talks that we had, Star Wars comes up not that often. He talks about other things that speak to storytelling in general, and the relationship of the storyteller to the audience, and the relationship of each generation and what story represents. So I think he's thought deeply about these things for a long time, and I just feel very lucky to have, you know, to be able to have conversations with him and get to know him as a person. But it's not like he comes in and says, that's like he calls up and says, you're doing this right or doing this wrong. But he's very generous in that when people reach out to him, he's very happy to fill them in on what his thinking was. And I know that other filmmakers within the Star Wars family have reached out to him, and he's been very generous with his input and his time.
Yo. Okay, we have time for...
Because there are a lot of Star Wars fans in the film community, as you could imagine. A lot of us were inspired to be filmmakers because of Star Wars. And it was before JJ came on board. We thought he was going to be doing Star Trek. Everybody was talking to each other. We're saying, "Are you going to do it? Who's going to do Star Wars?" And ultimately, JJ stepped up and took that responsibility and introduced Star Wars to a whole new set of fans and created a lot of wonderful characters. But there was discussion about there being not just the trilogy, the sequel trilogy, but also other titles. And Kathy Kennedy had a big vision that she was sharing with Disney about all the different types of movies you can make. And so the word went out, there's room for new Star Wars ideas that are beyond what George conceived of. And I looked at the old movies and I thought about it a lot. And I had an image as I was thinking about ideas of that Luke Skywalker would be older, and he'd be sort of like who Obi-Wan Kenobi was in the first original trilogy. And that, wouldn't it be cool if he was training the child he was training, the Padawan, if it was of Yoda's species? So that to the viewer who grew up watching it, they remember that the old Jedi Master of Yoda, the same species who trained Luke, would be a baby of that species would be who Luke was training. And we would read so much into that relationship and what it would mean to Luke Skywalker. I didn't ever discuss that idea with them. I never went in and pitched. It never came up, but it was in my notes as I was thinking about things I would like to see. Then the Disney Plus service was announced, and they were going to be making Star Wars. And I always felt that if I were to do Star Wars, I wanted it to be small. I want to be the size of when I first went to the theater and saw what's called now A New Hope. At the time, it was just called Star Wars. And I remember that although you had these giant spaceships and big space battles, it was usually like a Western or a samurai film, where it was a big horizon with a few people walking. There was a gunfighter. You go to the cantina. It was very much, it introduced me to Westerns and samurai films. I only knew it through Star Wars at that age. But then as I learned more and I heard George Lucas talk about his influences, I learned about Kurosawa. I learned about John Ford, Leone, and also Joseph Campbell, about mythology, about what it is to tell stories, about each culture telling a story, and how these heroes and archetypes and all of these conflicts that people go through seem to recur in every age and every culture. So that was our inspiration, was let's do something where we draw upon what influenced George. And George also grew up at a time when he was looking at World War II films when he was a kid. And he was looking at Flash Gordon in the movie theaters. And these were all the things that influenced him. And Dave Filoni and I talked, and we said, well, if we make Star Wars, let's not just look at Star Wars. Let's look at what influenced George and turned him into the filmmaker that he was. And let's go back to the source of what inspired him. And so we looked at the old Flash Gordon films. We looked at Kurosawa, Ford, Leone, and many others, and Peckinpah, and old television shows that were half-hour-long westerns. And that's where we drew our inspiration from. And I don't know if I'm answering the question directly, but that was what I then went in and pitched to Kathy Kennedy. It was very simple. I said, a guy walks into a bar. He's wearing Beskar armor. He's a Mandalorian. He walks in. People are picking on somebody else. They start picking on him. He cleans out the bar because he's such an effective gunfighter. And then the person who was being picked on goes to thank him, and he says, no, I'm here for you. And he puts down the wanted poster and grabs him and takes him out. So that was the first scene of the first episode. And they were into it. Kathy Kennedy was into it. She said, you know, Dave Filoni, he knows a lot. He's been talking about doing something with Mandalorians too. I had done a voice because I met Dave at the Skywalker Ranch when we were mixing the sound for the first Iron Man film. And he was working on the Clone Wars before that was out. And we showed each other what we were working on, and we became friends. And I said, if you ever need a voice, I loved it, I'm an actor too. And he brought me in to play Pre Vizsla, a Mandalorian, with the Darksaber. So it's a small world where weird coincidences happen. And I think I was inspired by that, by seeing him having so much fun. And so that was the inception of it.
Okay, we have.
Well, I think, you know, when Luke Skywalker popped up, it was not something that was planned from the beginning. But as Dave Filoni and I spoke about what was happening, where the story was going, because the characters and the story will point in the right direction. And he's been tasked to deliver this kid to some place where he can continue to learn how to control his abilities. And it becomes clear that you don't want a kid with this much ability to be undisciplined, because that could become very dangerous. That's where a lot of the most powerful villains in Star Wars come from, where it's a misguided application of the Force. And so it's important that responsibility is taken, and so that this character, the Mandalorian, is delivering this kid that he knows nothing about, and Mandalorians are historically enemies of Jedi. For him to deliver this character to a Jedi master was an interesting approach to the second season. And then we start to think about, well, who's he delivering the baby to? And we start to realize it wouldn't make sense if it wasn't Luke Skywalker, because we know that Luke Skywalker is creating an academy at this time in the history. It's been established, and we know that Luke Skywalker was called the Last Jedi. There are others that we realize are also still around and have survived Order 66, but Luke Skywalker's the one. And so we started to think, well, how would we do this? And we reached out first and foremost to Mark Hamill and said, we're thinking of this. And we showed him what we're doing. And as soon as Mark Hamill and Dave Filoni were like, this is the right way to go, then we had to figure out how to do it. What technology is available to help us present this story in a way that's not distracting? How do you present it? Peyton Reed was the director. And it was so fun to give little clues throughout that episode. First you see an X-Wing. Then you see in black and white a Jedi. Then you see the color of the lightsaber. Then you see that his hand has a glove. And then little by little you start to realize it's him. And he fights with a hood. And then eventually we used ILM and the best technology we had at the time to de-age him and played the music. And Pedro gave an amazing performance. And I remember, and we kept it top secret. We shot on one of our days off. And it's amazing, by the way, in this day and age that the secret had not gotten out. And all of it was so overwhelming. But for me, the kid who was 10 years old when Star Wars came out, when R2-D2 rolled on the set, I got choked up. That's when my brain started to fire in a weird way. Like, as artists, our subconscious leads us down a road that we don't know we're going down. And our subconscious shows us through our work the things that our conscious mind have to deal with. It forces us to look at things. Our subconscious knows us better than our intellectual mind. And through your work, if you're doing good work, from time to time, you will get messages from deep inside yourself. And there was something very moving about that moment, to be there and to be surrounded by these characters that I grew up with and these actors like Mark Hamill and a crew that had been working so hard and share the same passion. And it was just a really moving moment that made me feel very lucky to do what I do for a living.
Wow.
I didn't get to eat enough yet to give an educated answer, but I will say this, and I don't know the Spanish names, I apologize, but the eggs with potato, very good, right? And shrimp with garlic, that was
Ambas al ajillo.
and the Iberico ham, that's great. Iberico ham, I'm a fan of all of it. I have to come back so I can answer your question better.